Hello again, I'm Judith Green. I work for Somerset Libraries. This is part of a series called Food for Thought, which is a video series linking baking and reading, which I think works very well together. This is the second in the series and it's called Sourdough Bread. I'd refer you to the first video in the series if you haven't seen it, because that tells you how to make your sourdough, bulk it up and get it ready for making the bread, whereas this video deals with making the bread itself. So you'll be using the sourdough starter that you've already prepared. Now, making the bread takes 2 days altogether. We start this morning, do some more work on it this evening, and then tomorrow we continue with this and it should be ready later tomorrow afternoon. It's difficult to be quite sure because you're using wild yeast, which is rather less of a known quantity than baker's yeast. You'll be needing in total to make this loaf, you'll need 500 grams of wheat flour. That's not self-raising flour, but you can use plain flour if you can't get hold of bread flour. You'll need 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of oil, 2 teaspoons of sugar or honey, and some water. Now, I'd suggest also that you get your tin ready that you were looking for at the end of the last video. In an ideal world, this will be a 1 1/4 to 1.5 litre capacity loaf tin like this. You can use a cake tin as long as it's got the same capacity. You can use a baking sheet and make a cob or rolls, but sourdough is a soft dough and it does tend to spread rather, so you're probably better off using a tin if you can. So, today's ingredients. We're going to bring back our starter from the fridge. You might recognise this from the previous one. If you look hard, you can see it's beginning to separate slightly, but it's still looking a bit frothy on top. Okay. So I'm going to weigh out, just even the scales up first. 90 grams of flour. It's easier if you put the flour in first, then make a little hole in it. Nearly there. And now 90 grams of flour. Make a bit of a hole in it. And then 90 grams of water. It can be faintly tepid or cold. It's not hot though. If it's hot, it'll kill the yeast. And here's our starter that we've got ready. So I'm going to give that a little bit of a stir first of all, because especially if you've kept it for a few days, the flour particles tend to settle out, so you get a thin liquid on top and the flour on the bottom. So it needs to be evenly mixed first. And now you want 90 grams of that, which will probably be all right if you follow the recipe that I showed you in the first video. You may need to get the scraper out to get the last bits out to make sure there's enough, because it will use all of it. There we go. Just going to scrape that off. And that makes it to 90. So I've got a well in the centre of the flour and I've got the liquids in the middle. So I'm just going to start working in the middle and gradually move the spoon outwards further so that it takes in the flour. You get less lumps if you do it this way around rather than just putting it all in mugger. It looks a bit lumpy to start off with. You can use a wooden spoon either, which may be easier if you're used to using a wooden spoon to get lumps out of sauces and so on. And then start smoothing it, get the odd lumps of flour mixed in. So when the sourdough starter that you've added to that flour and water starts getting its teeth into flour, it should start fermenting and you'll have a good quantity so that you can put half back in the fridge and use the half to make your bread. So I'm going to cover that over, and I'm going to put that in a warm place. It can be an airing cupboard. I'm going to put it by the Arga, which is quite cool for lager, but quite warm for the kitchen. Or you can put it by a radiator or somewhere warm, not hot though. And we're going to leave that now until about 8 to 12 hours time, probably this evening. I find it works best for me if I start in the morning and do the second stage in the evening and then carry on the following morning. In terms of today's book, I couldn't resist this. It's an e-audio book, which is downloadable from the librarieswest.org site, which is free, using the Borrow Box app supplied by Somerset Libraries. It's called The Late Bloomers Club, and it's by Louise Miller. And I thought, with a title like that and an author of that name, what couldn't be appropriate for baking? It's about two sisters who own a cafe in a small town, but big changes loom because of an unexpected inheritance. If you have any problems getting hold of that, perhaps because it's been reserved, let me just turn this on and see. There we are. So that's what it looks like if you search for it. If you scroll down, then there are some suggested titles along the bottom based on what you've looked at, some alternative books that you might consider. So if that one's already gone, you can either reserve it by pressing the reserve button or choose a different book off the bottom line. Failing that, you can try an ebook, and another appropriate one I thought to do with cafes is called Killing in the Cafe by Simon Brett, which is an entertaining novel set around the closure of a village cafe. There's two detectives and a body, and I'll leave it with you. There are other Simon Brett books on the ebooks. So I'll see you again this evening and we'll take matters forward. Hello again. So it's 8 hours later. We're ready to look and see how the starter's getting on. There we are. So off with the lid. And that's looking very nice. You can see there's lots and lots of bubbles on there. And it's making a nice popping noise. Excellent. So now we're going to make the plie dough. We're going into a bigger bowl now. Even the scales. We've got 300 grams of flour. It's a bit much, we'll take a little bit out. Quite a lot out actually. There we are. 300 grams of flour. And then make a well in the centre for the liquids because it's easy to mix that way. We're going to put 200 grams of cold water in there. Cold or tepid's fine. So that's 20 up to 200 grams, a little bit more. There we are, 200 grams of water. Now, I'm going to divide the starter up. You might recognise this jar, I've washed it up, it's still labelled sourdough. I'm going to put 100 grams of this new starter back into the bowl. Give it a little stir around first in case it's settled. So 100 grams is going in here. So I'm going 70, 80, 90, 100 grams in there. The lid's going loosely on the jar and it's going back in the fridge ready for next time. And the rest of the starter is going to go in the bowl, in the well in the flour, with a flour and water. So I'm just going to scrape that down. All of it goes in now. This is what we call the pre-dough stage. It's a slightly looser and waterier form of the dough, so it's easier for the flour to work, and it doesn't have salt in it, which it will later on for the flavour. The salt's important to the taste, but it does inhibit the yeast, rather than if you're talking about fairly delicate yeasts. If it gets a head start without it first, that's all to the good. So we scraped all the starch in there, and now we're going to mix it all around as we did before, starting in the middle and gradually working out. So it's taking in the flour from the sides. This is thicker than it has been so far. More of a paste, you can see. You're not worried about working up a thick dough particularly at the moment. It's just incorporating all the flour. Scrape down the sides. Keep mixing and picking up the dry flour into the wet dough. Once you're onto a thicker dough like this rather than a thin paste, I find it easier to work with a wooden spoon. Get the flour worked evenly in there. Right, and as we've done before, scrape it down so it's all in one piece in the bottom. And then you'll need to scrape the pre-dough off the mixing spoon because it's a thicker dough now, so it tends to stick to things. Right, so that's going to sit in the bottom now. I'm just going to get a cover. You're going to put a cover on there to stop it drying out, and again put it in a warm place, but not too hot, and that's overnight for 8 to 12 hours. So I'll see you in the morning. Right, back again 10 hours later and ready to start making the topper dough. Just a few points before we start. You'll need to have found out your baking tin for the next session. You'll need a nice clean worktop that you can push the bread dough around on and knead it. Give it a good wash down, but finish with water so that you don't have any soap. Also, your hands, give your nails a scrub. We're all very good at washing our hands at the moment, but rinse them off to make sure there's no soap residues on there when you've finished. And you'll want a scraper. That's very useful at this stage. It's a very sticky dough and you're going to end up with a lot of it stuck to your hands in the worktop. Make sure you've got something to scrape it off before you put your hands in there. Right, we'll go and have a look and see how it's coming on. You can see it's risen already, so now we'll have a look. Okay, so we're well on the way. Let's have a look and see how it's going. That's looking very good. That will work nicely, I hope. You can see it's risen nicely. You might be able to see some holes in the dough below the surface. It's all nice and puffy, so it's ready to put the final ingredients in now. So now we've checked it's all right, I'm going to add some more ingredients. This is the final addition of ingredients, apart from any decoration that you might want to put on the top of the loaf. So 100 grams of flour, one and a half teaspoons of salt, you can cut the salt down a bit more if you want, but if for medical reasons you want to reduce the amount, but you will lose on flavour if you cut it down too far. And 1.5 teaspoons of honey, not too critical, I'd say that's about that much. And 1.5 teaspoons olive oil I use. Again, the amount isn't too critical, just a dash basically. You can use a neutral flavoured oil if you prefer, like sunflower oil or rapeseed oil. or you can use a little bit of butter or a little bit of lard, whichever suits you. It just improves the keeping quality slightly. So that's all weighed out, ready to go now. I'm going to mix it with a wooden spoon. Much easier with a wooden spoon at this stage. This will make the dough a little bit thicker. Try and scrape down little pieces on the edge so you get everything worked in. It's quite energetic bread making, very good for the upper arms. It's beginning to work quite well. Don't worry about getting it perfectly mixed because you're going to knead it now. As I say, kneading is a contact sport. So we're going to turn this out onto our clean worktop. That's where the scraper comes in, it's invaluable. Scrape it out of your bowl. Hang on to the bowl, you'll need it to put the dough back in once you've kneaded it. Let's move that along slightly. Yeah. I'm also going to tuck my badge in, otherwise I can see there's going to be accidents. Right, so kneading, you pull the dough away and push it into the middle. Pull it away, push it in the middle. It's a very sticky dough. You'll find you'll end up covered in dough. But as you go on, it will become more elastic and stick slightly less. Off you go. You're going to knead for 10 minutes. So check your clock, get your audio book running and enjoy a story while you're kneading. So try and run your fingers under the edge slightly, pull it up and then put it back on top of itself, folding it over each time. If you can put a little twist in to keep it turning around as well, that's better. It's harder at the beginning and easier as time goes on. You can see even now, after a few moments, it's getting a bit more structure. So I'm just going to turn this off and carry on kneading for a little while. Right, here we are, 5 minutes down, and you can see the dough's getting quite smooth and beginning to stick together in one large lump. So I'll keep on going for another 5 minutes. So here we are at 10 minutes. You can see the dough's forming a coherent lump. Still quite sticky. If you're familiar with ordinary bread making with baker's yeast, we usually have a stronger dough than that at this stage. But as I said, this is so that the weaker sourdough yeast can activate the bread. So that's going to go back in the bowl. That's lucky, all in one go. I don't need the scraper, just to clean my hands off afterwards. So that's in the bowl, like that. I'm going to put the lid on. It's going back in a warm place, warm but not too warm, and that'll be for about 3 hours. And while we're waiting for that, I'll just pass on a tip about ebooks and searching the catalogue for ebooks. If you look on the ebook catalogue, you'll see there's a lot of books to choose from. But if you click on them, you have to actually click on the book to see whether it's available now or whether someone else has got it. If instead you go to that browse menu in the corner there, and then go to filters, you'll see I've got mine set to available now, so it won't show me all the books that somebody else has already got out. It'll only show me ones that I can borrow now. If you go back now to browse, then hopefully any book that you look at should be available to borrow now. Yes, there we are. So that works. So that saves you the frustration of thinking, oh, that looks an interesting book. and then finding out that someone else has got it. Okay, see you later. Okay, this is the last handling operation we have to do now. So first of all, we're going to prepare the bread tin for the dough. Here's the tin. I'm going to grease it with a buttery paper. Butter or lard's best. If you use oil, it's more likely to stick, but you can try it. Try this into the corners, particularly, and along the top edges. Just hopefully it will rise well enough to go up there. You're not looking at lots of grease, you're just looking at a thin layer, and to make it slippery. Don't use spreads because they've got water in them and that will make it stick. There we are. So you can see you can't see a lot of fat in there, but you can see there's a bit of a greasy sheen in there, so that's ready. So I'll go and fetch the bread now. Here we are, it's looking very full, and that's risen really nicely. Now I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on the surface, not a lot, to try and reduce the sticking at this stage. I'm going to pull the bread dough out on the worktop. You can see how spongy it is, that's working very well. Obviously likes it where it is, it doesn't want to come out. There we are. So there's our dough already. Now we're going to tidy it up and turn it into a sausage shape so it'll go in the bread tin. You're not aiming to knead it hard, just pull it together. Just put a little more flour ready here. A little bit on the edge there on my fingers because it's sticking rather. Use the trusty scraper. You don't want to get too much flour worked into it because it'll change the proportions. Okay, so we're just trying to shape it into a sausage, taking the edges over and over and into the middle, and take the ends up and over. We'll go crosswise then, try again. If it won't shape up the first time, just keep trying and it'll get there in the end. Bring it over and press it. Turn it round. No, that's not going to go again. Try a little more flour on there. You can always brush it off if you end up with a lot of flour on the outside. That's better. You see I'm tucking the ends into the middle. And we're just going to tuck those loose ends over and lift it over carefully. Knock off the surplus flour and drop it into the tin. I'm going to flour the knife and just tuck those edges down. Flour the knife, then the dough won't stick to it. Right, that's a fair attempt. So it's about half filling the tin, if you see. Well, we're aiming for the dough to increase in size by about a half. So once it's reached within about a centimetre and a bit of the top, it will be ready to put in the oven. So I'm going to put this in a plastic bag, a pellet line, a clean one. You can try clean film across the top, you just have to keep it off the bread. Put it in there. and just twist the top round to keep it away from the bread, and that can go and stand somewhere warm to rise. And that's going to take 3 to 4 hours, so keep an eye on it. When it looks as though it's approaching that level, you need to turn the oven on to about 220 when you think it's within about 20 minutes of being ready. So I'll see you again as soon as the bread's ready to go in the oven. Okay, so it's doing really well. So after 3 hours, I've got in the bag, it's risen up. I've decorated the top with some porridge oats to make it a nice finish. Rather over-enthusiastic rise, unfortunately. Okay, and that's going in the oven at 220. I'll be back when we take that out. Okay, the 30 minutes at 200 has elapsed now, so we'll see how it's getting on. Here's a nice brown crispy loaf. This is the rack to cool it on. Best to stand on a grid if you can, otherwise it goes a bit soft. Because this is over risen slightly, I need to just run the knife down the edge to make sure it'll come out. There we go. Very hot, so mind you're wearing oven gloves. Now that should sound a little bit hollow. So there we have it, one loaf. And I'll just let it cool down before we cut a slice and see what it looks like. It's important to let it cool down because it doesn't cut properly, and also it finishes cooking. So we'll just give that some time to cool now. Well, the loaf's nice and cool now, so it's ready to cut, and we can see how it got on. Here we go. Crispy crust. Oh no, doesn't that look nice? Tastes good too. So, I hope yours is as successful as that, and I hope you're interested in listening to the next video. If all goes to plan, it'll be on what to do when you need bread in a hurry, and I'm looking at doing a sourdough bread recipe. But right now I'm going to settle down and have a slice of bread and damson jam and a cup of tea, and I'm going to listen to an e-audio book, which is Lindsay Davis's Falco, which is a radio adaptation of Lindsay Davis' Roman detective novels. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope to see you back soon.